welcome back to Let the Quran Speak. There are reports of some Muslims committing honor killings, and then there are other Muslims who want to disassociate themselves entirely from the whole idea of honor killings. So we'll be looking at that, Brother Shabir. What are honor killings, first of all, maybe to sort of go into the definition a bit of what it would be?
Honor killings are a particular type of murder that is premeditated for the purpose of protecting usually family honor. Mm-hmm. And that theoretical sort of definition finds its practical expression in the case where, for example, a man kills his daughter because his daughter has committed some act which brings dishonor and shame to the family. Something
that he might consider immoral or unchaste or something
Precisely.
Like this. So why do Muslims seem to hate the idea of an honor killing particularly?
Well, to begin with, the Quran in Surah 5 verse number 32 is very specific that to kill one soul is a very heinous crime, and we should not belittle the fact that it's okay, just one person died. Mm-hmm. That in the Quranic language is heinous in itself. Mm-hmm. You cannot imagine the gravity of this in the sight of God. But despite that, God makes exceptions for only two cases in which a soul may be taken legally. That one is the case of the life for life, where the capital punishment is to be meted out to a person who has committed murder, and this is brought to a court of justice, and this is the penalty decreed by the officiating judge, that being a choice between some other possibilities in that the person might be forgiven as well, or he might be given the capital punishment. The second thing is, as is described further down in the same chapter of the Quran, in Surah 5 verse number 33, is that which is called simply fasad fil ard, causing corruption on the earth, or more extensively, the description of that crime is the crime of waging war against God and His Prophet. Okay. So that's a very specific crime. It speaks of a high level of rebellion and armed rebellion.
But neither of these cases that you've mentioned are sort of individuals committing certain things.
True.
So individuals meting out punishment, I mean.
That's right. Individuals cannot take the law into their own hands and mete out punishment, either in the case of murder or in the case of these persons who are said to be waging war against God and His Prophet and committing corruption on the earth. So this has to be brought to the court of justice that is properly set up in an Islamic society, or in some other society where there is obviously a system of justice, and Muslims would not be allowed to take the matter into their own hands. But of course, what we have described as honor killings does not fall in any of these two categories. Honor killings usually is the act of killing a person because that person has brought shame to the family. But this is not one of the possibilities that is mentioned in the Quran for the taking of life. There are only two possibilities.
So there's no concept of honor killing within Islam then?
No, in fact, honor killing must be seen in Islam as dishonourable murder, and it is totally forbidden in the Islamic Sharia.
By all interpretations?
By all interpretations.
Okay.
I don't know of anyone who would say that, yes, one can kill his own relative, and this will be justified Islamically.
So why do some Muslims seem to be committing these honor killings?
I believe this is largely due to cultural accretions in regions in which Muslims have come to live. And we should be careful here to say that we are not judging any particular case. The particular cases have to be judged by courts of law. And we believe that we do have a fair system of justice in this country. But we are speaking more generally about the phenomenon. And of course, this is a phenomenon, because even if you cannot pronounce judgment in particular cases, there are enough cases
around the world.
on the whole, around the world, that speak to this phenomenon. So we cannot deny that it exists, but rather we should acknowledge it in order to be able to get rid of it. And we're only speaking about it here now, but the speaking about it can be a first step towards reaching some solutions. At least we can understand what is happening and why. So there are cultural accretions. It seems that prior to Islam, there was already, at least in the Mediterranean basin, the cultural presupposition that leads to honor killing. The idea that what a family member does may be so heinous that it reflects on the family, and the family has to do something about it. In the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 13, there is the case of apostasy that is mentioned. And it says very precisely that if one of your family members, that it names certain relationships, your brother and so on, if one of your family members was to become an apostate, meaning he starts to invite you to worship other gods besides the one true God, then you are to be the first to start stoning him, and then the rest of the people in the city will join in. But the family members should be the first hands to begin the act of killing this individual. That is, of course, not in the Quran. It's prior to the Quran, and it indicates that there was already this idea that some act may bring dishonor to the family, and the way the family clears its own position here is by initiating the death penalty on this individual.
What about the concept in Islam that the husband or the father has to sort of make sure, or has a responsibility in terms of making sure that the children grow up in a certain way, to be religious? And you know, there are all these pronouncements like when you must make sure your children pray, you know, all these things that seem to indicate that there's a certain family obligation to ensure that that the children grow up with a degree of religiosity or morality, things like this.
We should distinguish between a preaching and the legal precept. In terms of preaching, naturally we would encourage people, look after your family, be sure that your family is on the right path, and you yourself and so on. That's preaching. And then there's the legal precept. When we speak of legal precepts, we start to speak about not only of obligations but limitations and preconditions and so on. There are obviously limitations to a person's responsibility. Earlier in this show we spoke about the verse that says that God does not lay the burden of one on the other. A human being ultimately can only be responsible for his or her own actions, because as much as you can train your children and try your best with them, you cannot fix their minds. You can help to cultivate the kind of mind that Islam wants to build, but somewhere along the line somebody may turn out to be entirely different than what you expected. Some of the prophets of God had disobedient children. The case of Noah is prominent in the Quran. He went into the ark, his son did not join him. His son said, I will betake myself to the mountain and I'll be saved. And of course he was eventually drowned. So here you have a prophet and you have a disobedient son. But it's not for the prophet to beat his son into complicity. That is not the complicity that is required. What God requires from us is not a sort of obedience that is forced out of us, but an obedience which comes from the inner soul, a person deliberately choosing to do this. But we can help our family members through persuasion, through encouragement, through positive reinforcement, and buying gifts and presents and so on, coaxing, giving rewards, and even sometimes denying some privileges and showing some discomfort and dislike for what the person is doing and all of that. But these have their limitations. And obviously it cannot lead to eventually killing a person, because that would be murder, and that would be worse than what the other person is doing. The other person may be committing some sins or whatever, but if you commit murder, this is worse than what the other person had been up to.
All right, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we answer questions we've received from you, our viewers.